David Johnston.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow my honourable friend, member for Newcastle under Lyme, and the member for Waveney. I mean, I think there's been a range of very good speeches today, but I was struck by a couple of things the member for Waveney, no longer in his place, said. One, about FE having been this Cinderella service for so long. And two, about the risk of people who are quite affluent using this just as an additional qualification to ones they've already that they've already gained. And I'll be talking about access a bit in my speech, but I think it chimed well with that. As some members of the House know, I used to run charities for disadvantaged young people before I entered this place in 2019. And those charities pretty much worked with young people who are aged 16 to 25. So a couple of them who went all the way down to age 10, but the bulk of the young people I worked with in the 16 years before becoming an MP were aged 16 to 25. So I have quite a bit of familiarity with how the system pushes people to 3-year courses at university at the age of 18. And indeed, you're set on that path before you even get there, because of course by 16, you're having to choose the courses that are hopefully going to set up the university course that you want at 18. If you're not studying chemistry A-level, you're not going to be admitted to a medical course when you get to 18. So we put people on a narrow track at a very early age. I mean, there's all sorts of debates about international baccalaureate and whether there should be a broader range of subjects that we study. But just thinking about this university track at 18, you're having to pick those things at 16. Your visits at school will very often be to universities rather than to colleges and employers. You have a UCAS system, and I'm really glad we're changing this, by the way, but you have a UCAS system that makes it incredibly easy for you when you're that age, when you're in year 12, when you're moving into year 13, to be able to apply to university. One form, 5 universities. It couldn't be much simpler than it is, although there are obviously difficult things you have to do to put the form together. And so everything is saying to young people, but also saying to adults, that there's a slip road here at this point, but if you miss it, if you miss your junction, to sort of mix the metaphor slightly, if you miss it, that's it, and then you'll be set on a path. You'll be set on an incredibly long road, and there won't be the opportunity for you to come off at the next junction and go back and go and find that junction again, because you will be set on it. And this is what our whole system has done for a very long time. And it's been quite instructive. You know, there are two big influencers of young people that, and I don't say this as a criticism, but they reinforce that message to young people, and that's parents and teachers. Now, as I say, I don't say it as a criticism, because we've all got to do better at this. But parents often want their children to go to university, even if they haven't been before. You know, my parents wanted me to go to university, but I was the first generation in my family. It's held up, as I know for lots of other people, it's held up as the thing that you do if you're aspirational, and the alternatives are not given the seen in the same aspirational way that they should be. And of course, most teachers did exactly what we're talking about in this chamber today. Most teachers got to 18, went to university, did a teacher training qualification after that, and then joined the profession. So it's the thing they're most familiar with too. And we have seen... I will give way.
I'm most grateful to the honourable member in giving way, and he makes a very, very important point about the influencers who inspire individuals to go to university, whether that's teachers and parents. A point that needs to be looked at now, it's with regards to the Department of Education, is they've just carried out the initial teacher training market review, which affects teacher recruitment. And they've removed 12 universities, Greenwich, which covers Medway, and also to University of Durham, from providing those teacher training opportunities, affecting over 4,492 future training teachers. If we are to inspire the younger generation to go off to university, we need outstanding teachers, and also we need a cross-spectrum of universities across the country providing that. So does he agree with me that it's absolutely right we get the right teachers, but also we need to ensure that these reviews take into account the excellent work being carried out by teachers across those institutions already?
I think my honourable friend makes a very important point, and I don't know enough about why they've been removed, so I wouldn't comment. But one of the points I will come on to later is that, you know, outcomes are very important here for young people, for adults, whatever type of qualification they're studying. It's the outcome they go on to, which I think is one of the things we've really got to be judging here, rather than just saying, well, you have to go to university or you have to do this sort of thing instead. And I think when it comes, what we've seen with things like apprenticeships and higher technical qualifications, which I know this bill is not apprenticeships, but higher technical qualifications is one of the things this bill is going to enable people to do, if they want to, with a lifelong learning entitlement, is do things which actually teachers and parents are not familiar with. And that's quite important. So, I mean, my honourable friend, the member for Waveney, was talking about the importance of careers advice, as other people have done. The truth is, there are very few good examples of careers advice anywhere. State sector, private sector, young, old. There is, you know, a lot of how we make our decisions are based on anecdote, based on being told what not to do rather than what to do, not understanding the full range of options that are available. And so, you know, one of the things we have to do with this is also help parents and teachers understand the range of options that are available to young people, because, you know, if they knew those, they'd probably be more open to promoting them.
Will you give way?
I will give way.
I'm very grateful to him for giving way, and he speaks with great authority on these matters. I completely agree with the point he just made about careers advice. Does he agree with me that perhaps what's needed at that sort of 16 to 18 year age is better course advice about what courses people should be taking, what will open up the most doors? Because a lot of people have no idea what career they want to take at 16 or 18. I know, for one, I didn't.
Look, my honourable friend makes another very important point, and it leads incredibly nicely on to the point I was just about to make, which is that, you know, I understand the motive from which the Labour Party said it wanted 50% of young people to go to university. You know, they did not have a malign motive in having that. They believed it was aspirational. They believed that it would help us compete. But it's had, very clearly, a number of negative consequences. And to my honourable friend's point, one of the most important of those negative consequences is that we've said to people the most important thing you can do is go to university at 18, and it doesn't particularly matter where you go to university, and it doesn't particularly matter what you study. The most important thing is that you go to university, because we want all young people to go to university. And what we know now very clearly, thanks to a whole range of organisations, but including the Institute for Fiscal Studies, which has done great work on this, is that there are a number of institutions you graduate from and you earn less than you would have done had you just got a job. And in 2020, they found about 20% of people go to university and earn less than people with similar grades who just got a job. So, you know, 1 in 5. Now, we may, you know, dislike that that's the case. We might wish that every university you went to gave you the same earnings outcome, or that every subject you studied gave you the same earnings outcome. But when I was working in this field, there were 60,000 university courses you could choose from. So of course they don't all give you the same outcomes. Of course, certain universities, particularly Russell Group ones, give you higher earnings. Particular courses like medicine and engineering and maths and so on will give you will give you better earnings. And The truth is, given the charities I work with were overwhelmingly supporting disadvantaged young people, it's usually them that aren't getting that advice. It's usually them that are paying large amounts of money on courses which don't add to their employability outcomes, because they're not getting better information, advice and guidance at a young age from school or from parents the way a middle-class child might do so. So that's one big thing where the 50% target has prioritised quantity over quality. I will give you.
I thoroughly endorse the direction of my honourable friend's thoughtful argument. And does he agree with me that even at the Russell University end of the spectrum, there's been a serious issue to do with grade inflation, where so many people are now awarded first and upper second class honours, a large majority, I think, in institutions where 20 years ago 1 in 10 might, if you're lucky, get a first class degree, that it becomes very difficult for employers to pick out people for the right reasons for the right jobs.
I completely agree with my right honourable friend, and part of why that has happened, of course, is because, you know, young people feel, well, I'm making an investment here. You know, I'm paying £9,000 a year. I'm not doing that for you to give me a 2-2 or a third at the end of it. I do not want to be paying all that money in order to get that at the end of it. And there's been this pressure on universities, often unfortunately with the threat of legal action from parents who can afford it, to sort of inflate the grades that people are being given. So I think, you know, this is another unintended consequence. Now, I know that people will say, look, it's not just about the money that you can earn after your degree, and that's completely the case, but because we are making that investment as individuals at that age, it's understandable that we want to see there is an impact on our earnings. But when you look at the money that's being borrowed, another problem with this is, you know, lots of people will never pay this money back. So this is a huge amount, this is a huge liability for the taxpayer. Some of those taxpayers have been to university themselves, some of them haven't. But they will all incur this cost where we lend that money to people to go to university. But then if they don't earn enough to be able to pay it back, then the taxpayer won't get a return on that investment. And at the moment, we're on course for only a quarter of people to pay back to fully pay back their student loans. Well, that's a huge amount of money that the taxpayer is investing unnecessarily, and something that I hope with this bill we will be changing. As has been touched on, it is also the case that the 3-year model, full-time model for people at 18, does not suit every sort of young person. And lots of the young people I used to work with at the charities I ran would have caring responsibilities. They had, you know, either for younger siblings or for ill relatives, or perhaps, unfortunately, a member of their family had died and they'd had greater responsibilities, or they needed to work alongside study to be able to supplement the family income. And so again, it's something where we need greater flexibility. And that's before you come on to the technological change that we are expecting, where we will see some of the most radical technological change the country has ever seen, where lots of things we train people for today will become obsolete. And if you have made a decision at 18 about the particular course you want to study for a particular job, and in 20 years find that actually that job is obsolete and you need to go and, you know, retrain for something else, this is why this bill will be so important. As an aside, lots of jobs should not need a degree anyway. And we have slipped, again, with this 50% target, I'm afraid. What has happened with this is, in order to make the lives of employers easier, we have applied a higher and higher degree threshold in order to weed people out when we make selection decisions. If everybody's got a degree, you end up then starting to ask for master's degrees. So you have entry inflation, not just grade inflation, which is something else. But above all, what it's done is contribute to this disparity of esteem between academic and vocational courses. And as has been touched on, this is a limited, smallish bill, but it's so important for what we're trying to do here in creating that parity of esteem, giving people the equivalent of £37,000 in today's money to be able to train themselves across their lifetime at some point in the future when they decide they need to be studying qualifications that they don't yet have. Promoting lifelong learning, promoting modular learning, having limits on course and module fees based on credits, and also subtle things which, going back to this point about the whole system being geared to one particular model, changing from an academic year to a course year is hugely important, because again, when everything is geared to academics, you're continually reinforcing the message that that this is the only model for people. We know lifelong learning has a huge number of benefits. We know it will help with earnings, because it's been the case for some considerable time that only about 1 in 8 of the people who are in low pay have escaped low pay a decade later. That's been true for decades. Part of that is about progression. And progression is partly the job of employers, by the way, to have good strategies for it, but it's also about this. It's about allowing adults to be able to train in things they're not able to, so they can get more skills and then they can get more money after it. I will give way.
You just came in after he'd started his speech, so forgive me, but is he trying to, in his very good speech, reinvent the individual learning accounts, which was an early attempt by Tony Blair's government in order to give that lifelong pattern and open the opportunities? And unfortunately, they found out very quickly, and I was chair of the education committee at the time, they found it could be scammed and it collapsed. No, everyone said they should have brought it back, even the Deputy Speaker, who used to be one of my students, even he believed in it, and it's never been resurrected.
Well, I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman. I'm a politician, so I'd never try and reinvent the wheel. I think what we're trying to do with this is learn from some of the problems that you had with that situation, because life learning is so important, because people will need to retrain, and people cycle in and out of work, and there'll be jobs none of us have even considered that we will need to train people for. And developed economies like ours are historically bad at retraining people for new technology. You know, it's not just a UK problem, it's a US problem, it's all the developed economies find this difficult. And I think this is an important way that we can help people. That's before you get to the health and well-being advantages that there are of lifelong learning too, which are also well documented. Now, this is set in the context of a couple of problems that I know my honourable friend, the Skills Minister, is very familiar with. One is about access. So it is still the case that access to certain universities is not what it should be, that disadvantaged young people find it very difficult to get into certain universities, and we've got to make better progress at that. Some of them still dominated by those from private schools. This matters for everything we're training people to study. Ditto international. What some universities have made much better progress at is getting international students in, not low-income students. They do that because it gives them a lot more money for the university, but actually they need to be making a good contribution to social mobility at home. And so, for me, for what I hope the Minister will be doing with this lifelong learning entitlement, as with everything else, is really applying two tests. What are the outcomes for people who undertake certain courses? Because I'm agnostic about whether it's level 4 or level 8, whether it's academic or vocational. The thing I care about most is, does it help you get a better outcome than you otherwise would have had if you hadn't done that qualification, which unfortunately has not been the case with lots of the university courses people have done at 18. And the second thing, very simply, is, do disadvantaged young people or older people who've been disadvantaged get their fair share of the courses that will really help them to have those better outcomes, because across degrees, across apprenticeships, too often it's the most affluent, the most privileged who take most of the spaces on the things that will give you the best outcomes. But all of that said, I think this is a very important bill that's trying to get us to that parity of esteem, and I'm very pleased to support it.